Okay, yeah, because I'm not on right now.
But I don't know. So I said, when she goes, you talk to her or give her the person what's available that Christmas. She loves Christmas very much. And she immediately volunteered this. She said, well, tell her.
Okay, I'm not showing it on my dashboard here. Maybe it's going to refresh. Okay.
And I said, I have no idea what that is, unless it's racial.
Okay, can I just kind of mute this right now?
And she said, it's my life. She said, I think it is the Monday for Wednesday.
Because as long as I'm live right this minute and I'm good, I can mute that from the Revo.
I don't know if it's Paramount Princess or all of them.
What do you think?
They're doing, this is special. Order it.
Okay, where is that? Right there with the microphone. She got
Yeah. I lived through it once before. I can do it again.
You're on, Duff. Hi, everybody. Melinda Vail and Dr.
Hi,
Duffy
I'm Dr. Duffy McMahon.
Hello,
Hey.
how are you?
Way to go today.
Hey, listen, you guys, thanks so much for last week and everybody that called in for the night of readings. We had a wonderful time. I know there are still some of you that I have to answer some emails, and I promise I'm going to get to that. So, and don't hesitate to call and write in next week with your emails. And, you know, next weekend is my big weekend.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm going to be there.
I know. And
So is my hubby.
And he's going to do the introductions, and that's going to be awesome. We're going to be at Changing Hands Bookstore on Thursday night at 6 o'clock. Please call Changing Hands and make a reservation for your seat. It's free, but because we expect a lot of people, you need to reserve a seat, where James and I will both be talking about our books. His is Wisdom of Spirit Guides, and mine is Diary of a Mad Medium. And then Friday night, we're going to be at the Omni. Pat's going to introduce us. We're going to do a night of readings. It's going to be lots of fun.
It was last year. It's
We
going to be
had-
more fun this year.
We had a lot of fun last year.
we had a great
James
time.
and I work well together.
Phenomenally. You've never seen anything like two, especially if you're two mediums, you know, together on stage. It was just so smooth, so sweet, so great to watch the two of you.
Well, you know, we have similar way that I think we connect, so
Right,
it's nice. And then Saturday is more important than Friday, though,
Yes.
because Saturday we're actually going to be talking about how to connect with those spirit guides and understanding what that means, as well as how to understand your karmic profile. So we're going to talk about, you know, what's going on with your spirit, like how do you understand what your spirit guides are doing for you and with you, and what's your karmic profile, and how to understand that.
And
So-
how to really listen to your spirit guides.
to your guides, yeah,
Yes.
which really is part of the problem for all of us if we don't listen.
Right.
We were just talking about people with that disease called MAN.
Yeah, it's a tough disease to get over because you're really born with it.
But tonight we're going to talk about, you know, we did this thing a couple months ago. I don't know, when was it, Duff?
I guess it was last month. We decided to do one a month, I think, is what we
Yeah,
decided.
and we did Lizzie
Lizzie
Borden.
Borden.
And Duff does all of the homework, the investigation,
The research,
research and all that. And I just sit here and listen to her and figure out and figure out what the energy is around it. So we're going to look at the karmic profile and the energy around the Kennedy assassination this evening. And that happened in 1964.
Nope.
63, 65, 60, I was
Pick
11.
one. No, 1963.
1963. I wasn't 11. I thought I was 11.
No,
I was
no.
I remember, it was third grade, because I remember it was so shocking
Yeah.
when we saw on TV
Yeah.
Ruby assassinating or killing Lee Harvey Oswald, because, you know, in those days
Oh.
there was no violence on TV. Dragnet, maybe, you know.
But there wasn't violence in Dragnet. They just went
That's
up and
what I
said,
meant.
you know,
There was no
just,
real, you know.
just the facts, ma'am. You know.
I know.
So that was
so
it.
shocking, and it's kind of plugged into my third grade mind.
Yeah, and so I was a freshman in high school. So
You're not that much older than I am. You were like in second grade,
I
right?
was in first. I wasn't born yet.
So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at the karmic profile. You know, Greg Braden, and if you guys have not read Greg Braden's work,
yeah.
it's wonderful work. And if you've
Amazing.
not listened to him speak, please do so, because he's wonderful. But he does some work on something that he calls fractal time. Fractal time is about history repeating itself. And one of the interesting things about the Kennedy assassination is that Lincoln was assassinated in the White House, and he had a secretary named Kennedy, and Kennedy was assassinated in the White House, and he had a secretary named Lincoln. And there was some similarities to all of it. So that's a fractal energy. And then when we're doing karmic profiling, to look at the karmic profile of the Kennedy family itself would be very, very interesting.
And that's kind of what I looked at. I decided to just kind of look at the history of JFK and himself, because, you know, JFK's family, he came from a fairly wealthy family. His father, Joe, had been in a number of things, from banking to bootlegging to shipbuilding to film and so forth.
The bootlegging is
what
where
they-
they got into bed with the mafia.
Yes,
because they were
pretty
the
much.
elite, and the mafia was the elite on the East Coast in those days. And
But you had parents. You had Rose and Joseph, who were very, very strict Catholic, very, very strict when it came to education. The whole family apparently around would sit at dinner time, and they had to have looked up some sort of story and report on it. And it was, like I said, it was kind of intimidating if you were not part of that intellectual aspect of that family. and also physical. So you, growing up, I remember hearing about the football games, the constant competitors.
So in their
Yeah.
nurture,
Uh-huh.
they were taught to be competitors,
Uh-huh.
both intellectually and physically.
Exactly.
And they were taught that they needed to show up, like they did at the dinner table, with some form of excellence.
Exactly.
So that's in their nurture. What
yeah.
was in their nature?
The nature is that all of them were very, very physical and enjoyed it. Their nature was part of the, I would say, really involvement in community more than anything else. Rose actually was the mayor of Boston at one time.
That's interesting.
Yeah, did not know
Well, their
that.
nature would have been their Irish Catholicism, because,
yes.
you know,
Yeah.
that's what comes through the DNA. And so old-time Catholics, if we're talking about old-time Catholics, I'm an old-time Catholic. I was not allowed to go up on the altar. Women were considered less than in those days, so it's pretty monumental for Rose at that time to have become a mayor. So I think
Yeah.
she was a very strong matriarch, which, you know,
Yeah,
would
she
have
was
meant
she
that
was
the
a strong one of the family. In fact, I think that most of the kids were more afraid of Rose than they were Joseph.
perhaps
And
that's why some of them became misogynists.
most likely, you know. Well, Joe was not exactly the quintessential family dad of today. So he was more of the paternal icon, not really there.
So an absentee father
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah,
a strong mother.
Yeah, he was literally involved in his banking, his bootlegging, his women, his involvement in films, and a lot in Hollywood. So he wasn't really there all the time. But again, all involved in politics. His father became the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. So
Joe's
Joe was,
father?
yeah,
And what-
no,
you know
Joe.
what-
No, Joe.
oh, Joe
Joseph
was-
yeah. Not much about their parents, but they were both, again, they were demanding that you be physically fit, that you be intellectually fit, and that you were going to be a competitor and you were going to win.
So if we were going to do a true karmic profile in this family, we would go another generation up.
yeah.
We would see what made Rose be the domineering factor, what made Joe be someone that was a womanizer and an absentee father, because we know that both John Kennedy and Edward Kennedy were pretty blatant, you know,
Misogyny.
womanizers and misogyny.
Well,
For
actually,
those of you that don't know, just
Robert wasn't too bad either.
was he? Okay. For those of you who don't know what the word misogyny means, it means a man who uses women as objects of their referral, not as real people, but as sex objects.
Yeah. Some take it to mean that they really do not care about women very much. They don't see them as people as such. But again, Rose was that. Brother Joe, who was the oldest of the Kennedy boys, was actually being prepped to run for politics and to be in politics. He was killed during World War II. JFK, also in World War II, almost was killed. You know from his Profiles in Courage book and PT 109.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you look at that part.
So, you know, maybe in certain ways, because I really want to get into the energy more than just, you know, talking about what they did. I really want to actually help the audience understand the karmic profile here. You know, I had an aunt who was a twin, and she used to joke because my grandmother was very into the boys in the family. It was all about the boys.
Right, exactly.
And so
well, that's
my
an
aunt-
Irish family.
That's an Irish family. And my aunt used to joke that she was spare parts. So, you know, if they're grooming Joe in certain ways, and then Joe disappoints them by dying,
Yeah.
and the next best thing is John, then maybe he had some residual feelings of being the second choice.
Yeah, he did that, but he felt he had to, in a way. So he was the one to have to go into politics. Both John and Robert, though, were extremely liberal, very liberal in their thinking, very liberal in everything that they believed in. Which was interesting for the time.
Unless you ask the liberals, and then they would say that JFK was a conservative.
Yeah.
I think JFK was in the middle of the road.
Yeah,
He was conservative to the liberals and liberal to the conservatives. He just really wanted freedom for
everybody.
a man.
Ironically, you know that JFK and Barry Goldwater were really, really close friends. Republican Barry Goldwater, to the point whenever they were talking about going on the road together to campaign for the '64 election had John Kennedy lived, they were going to do the old style railroad car across the United States and do their debates.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah, that would have been. But JFK also suffered from Addison's disease. Okay, Addison's disease is an adrenal insufficiency, and it's very, very painful. So
We should have looked that up in Louise Hay's book to find out what the mental thought
should have,
process
yeah.
was on that.
yeah, but he was in pain a lot. Used injections of amphetamine, so he was really kind of, if he had back surgery, he had all kinds of things while in office.
That means, you guys, that somewhere in his subconscious mind or somewhere in his karmic profile, he would have had a belief in suffering. So that has to come either through nature or nurture or something from the Akashic records, because you can't suffer that much pain and that much kind of a life without having it part of your karmic profile. My understanding was that one of the Secret Service agents had gone to the vehicle, past the vehicle, you know, when the vehicle with Kennedy's body got to the hospital, he was still in the vehicle. And he walked past and saw that Kennedy was in the vehicle with his eyes open and felt like Kennedy was going to say to him, "Don't worry, I'm okay," because he never complained, is what they said.
Yeah, But also, John Kennedy never lost an election. From the time he started getting into the politics, went into Congress, and
Why do you think that is, Don?
well, I think it's part of the family thing. It's just it was a family business in a way. So if one of the boys, when he was campaigning for anything, the family got involved. So when he campaigned for Congress in 1946, the girls in the family, where they go over, and Rose would hold teas and do all. So it was a.
You know what I think it's part of? I think it's part of the fact that Kennedy was one of the very first presidents and politicians to run when we had television. And he was a damn good-looking man. And I think people judge each other by the way they look.
Well, that's the big
and he
thing
was
for the election,
articulate,
yes.
and he had good speech writers, and because he was on TV, and
he sounded good, he sounded intelligent,
and he looked
so forth.
pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that was part of it.
That was a big part of it.
The energy was, you know.
Nixon had once said that he lost the election because of television.
I'm sure he did.
So he really, and if you see how the response changed from from Nixon to Kennedy at that time, you will see how the influence of television had on that in particular.
So do you think in the family's vibrational frequency, it wasn't just John, but do you think that somewhere, if we went back through the family line, we would see this consciousness factor of continued suffering? Because, you know, we've talked about not only in his generation, but, you know, they had a handicapped child, they lost their son in war, and you go on into their family background, and then, the other kids, as you go down the line, and, you know, one of the kids had cancer, and, you know, all of the, John Jr. dying in the plane crash. Somehow in this family's vibrational frequency, there's some kind of a manifestation energetically of a belief in suffering or a belief in loss.
Right. Well, and the family had a lot of problems. They had one of the daughters. They actually had her committed and had a lobotomy done because she was, let's just say, she was free with her sexuality, and that was a big no-no. And they actually had her put into an asylum. And she did not go along with the family at all. She was a problem child, and so instead of realizing what was going on with her, they ended up having her have a lobotomy and spend the rest of her life in a mental institution.
I wonder what that karmic profile was. Can you imagine that? Like, what was that karmic profile about?
Yeah.
Holy mackerel. You know, it'd be interesting, you know, what her spirit was trying to create and understand. So that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Here's Bill just handed us what Addison's means in Louise Hay.
Oh, no longer caring for self.
Yeah, defeatism.
Defeatism, yeah. Well, look at that, because he had Addison's disease. I don't know when it came on, but here he was. He almost died in World War II. A lot of suffering from there. I think he also felt bad that he lived when a lot of his his crew members and everybody else
I
did
would
not make
say
it.
that
So
PTSD might be
Yeah,
a very
big part of it, yeah.
part of it, Duff. Absolutely. In World War II, there was not a recognition. My father came home from the South Pacific with white hair at 26 years
Oh
old.
my, yeah.
I don't think there was the level of recognition about PTSD from World War II that should have been. There
No,
should have been a better awareness.
Yeah, well, they
of that.
called it shell shock. That
They
was
certainly
it. So
did.
the shell shock as opposed to anything else, and they didn't know how to take care of it or what to do.
Okay, so here we have a good-looking,
Mm-hmm.
articulate, intelligent man who, through his nurture, was
Mm-hmm.
raised to be a winner. That they were competitive and they had to strive for excellence the whole way. They had a domineering mother and they had an absentee father.
Mm-hmm.
And he raises the ranks to be president of the United States. And that leads us to what happened when he was assassinated, because that's really what we want to talk about tonight, is how
Okay.
the energy around the assassination.
Well, the
was.
energy around the assassination looks really kind of very, very interesting because when he got into office, he had problems within, right away. First of all, his own opinions that he wanted nothing to do with communism. He had a problem with Castro and communism. He was really a liberal when it came to human rights. So a lot of the things that went on were kind of not what most of the society was talking about at
He
the
ruffled
time.
feathers.
He ruffled feathers. And he kind of ruffled CIA feathers a lot. And had a problem with the CIA because they advised him to go into Cuba for the Bay of Pigs. Now with the Bay of Pigs, well, you have somebody like JFK who was in the military, had a lot of different things going on, and with the Bay of Pigs, it didn't go like they thought it was going to go. So what happened is that Castro ends up killing a lot of our soldiers and capturing the rest. So
The energy around it, when I look at the energy around it, was more of, first of all, I believe that the mafia that helped get JFK going,
right.
and the friendships that his family had with the mafia were upset with him once he got into the office, because the mafia wanted to use Cuba as a place of
Business.
refuge for, there was, a lot of gangsters that, were supposed to be deported back to Italy and went to Cuba instead.
Yeah.
And when Castro came into office, I think that the CIA and the mafia teamed up in certain ways with some of that.
Because they wanted to get rid of Castro because of that. They didn't want communism in Cuba. They wanted to still be a part of. They actually probably wanted it to be kind of like a Puerto Rico and a United States, island ship, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was a giant dollar. I personally think it was a giant dollar sign.
Huge, yeah. But with somebody like JFK, to lose that many soldiers under his command and realize that the information he got from the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he never trusted them again, which is a big thing. So he had kind of a problem with the CIA, big problem. And that was Averell Harriman, and believe it or not, Bush Sr.
Oh, I believe.
Yeah, and Bush Sr. was one of the major parts of the CIA at that time. The Bay of Pigs happened. What he does is that he ends up being able to work with Russia on getting, dismantling any of the missiles in Cuba. But then he put a
Didn't he and Khrushchev have letters that went back and forth, and
yeah,
Khrushchev got
yeah.
insulted by some of his letters?
Right. But he also put a quarantine on Cuba that lasted until now. So that's the thing. But he finally was able to get a signed nuclear test treaty with Russia. So he's also starting to look at trying to get rid of the nuclear missiles that we had and what we have talked about for the last 60 years that I know of disarming nuclear weapons.
Well, don't you think the energy with Trump and Korea is very similar right now? The energy
Exactly.
between Kennedy and Cuba, it's another fractal time. If you're looking at the energy around all of this, it's another fractal time where we're in a situation in this country where we're being threatened by someone who could have missiles directed to our country, and what to do about it. And I think one of the things that happened with Kennedy was he was advised to get more military about the Bay of Pigs, and he
Yeah.
chose to stand down in
Yeah.
certain ways. That
Yes.
was one of the things that pissed the CIA off, I think, was that he
Yes.
tried to do it more in a compromising way
Diplomatic way,
rather
Yeah.
than go
And
to war.
also, also because he did invite Khrushchev over here and was trying to work with the Soviet Union on being able to have some semblance of a rapport with.
So what is the difference energetically between Trump's energy with Korea and Kennedy's energy with Cuba? And what is the difference between the karmic profile between the Kennedy family and the Trump family? Since, the Trump family is a wealthy elite family, just like the Kennedy family
Yeah,
is. That
all
Trump
in
is a
one.
misogynist, just like Kennedy was.
Well,
We
here-
all
here-
forgave Kennedy's affairs. None of us seem to forgive Trump for his. What's the difference?
Time. We are looking at a societal paradigms shifting, but if you look at JFK and you look at Trump, JFK had a very interesting thing because of he was president. He put his brother as Attorney General. Ted was a senator from Massachusetts. Eunice's husband, Sergeant Shriver, was also
Nepotism at its finest,
Yes,
and still we're screaming about Trump. Yeah,
Right,
and everybody thinks that Kennedy was Camelot.
Yeah, and but again, it was.
I'm not saying
No.
that it's good or bad. I'm
Yeah.
just being devil's advocate here
No,
because we
the-
are talking about the energy around
The
everything.
energy is the same. Tragically, the intellect is different.
You know what
But-
I think is different?
What?
The feminine principle.
Right.
I think that we have to recognize that this planet is moving more into the
into
feminine
feminine.
principle. I don't think women tolerate things the same way that they did in 1964.
Oh
I
my
certainly
gosh, no.
don't think that I would tolerate some of the things that my mother did. I wouldn't tolerate some of the things that happened to me when I was groped as a young waitress in a restaurant. So, I think that sometimes the feminine energy has shifted.
It
on
has
the planet.
shifted, and to the point where it is causing a lot of problems within males in our society. They're feeling like they are not being respected, that we are taking their jobs. They want to go back. Well, Trump was, go back to a greater America. Now, I don't know what a greater America was, because I think America is pretty great right now. But they look back on a time when everything was going their way. If you were a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, you didn't really achieve a lot in the United States. You could work hard, you could do different things, but if you look at who was running the country, it was not as diverse as it is today. You didn't have black people in Congress, in the Senate. You didn't have Hispanics. You didn't have women. Yeah, maybe one or two, but
Some of that is thanks to the Kennedys, I think. But
Yeah.
I don't
So-
want to throw all men under the bus because I have the most wonderful man on the planet that lives with me.
And I have the second one,
He,
so.
he respects women immensely. But I'm just saying, I think that the feminine principle is, we're talking not about personalities and not about intellectual things. If we're talking about energy alone, that the karmic profile of this planet is shifting back to a more feminine energy where certain things are less tolerated
Yeah.
than they once were. So in today's world, Kennedy might equally be put under the microscope for some of his behaviors,
but
as is Trump.
again,
That's all I'm saying.
Look at the difference in media today. First of all, we got media 24/7 every place, and you can write whatever you want to. At that time, I mean, really up until 64, 68, 72 elections and so forth, the press was very different towards the president. They would keep secrets. So, they would not show FDR in his wheelchair. They did not even talk about aspects of womanizing. That was just something that you didn't do. So again,
But
the
it wasn't
paradigm
just
is-
something that Bill Clinton introduced to us all.
No,
It-
no,
it
no, no,
actually
no.
has been
Uh-uh.
happening for
forever. Yeah,
long
I think
time.
the only one that we know of that did not have any type of outside woman in his life was Harry Truman.
Well, how about Jimmy Carter? He just lusted for his neighbor's
Well,
wife.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
For those of you who are too young to understand that, I'm sorry.
But the thing is with Truman, if you knew Bess would just kill him. So that was it.
So we're looking at this situation with Kennedy and Cuba, the CIA and the mafia, and looking at his presidency and what he was doing as far as ruffling feathers. Bring us to the day of the actual assassination.
The day of the actual assassination. Okay, we have to go to the day of the assassination. Now he was in Dallas with all people, Governor Conley, who was not a big supporter of Kennedy, nor was Lyndon Johnson. Did not like each other at all. Lyndon Johnson, there's a book about him being behind the killings. So whether it's true or not, I mean, there's more conspiracy theories when it comes to this particular assassination than you could ever even dream of. But so here's the motorcade coming down. They print the route in the paper, so everybody knows the route that the caravaner is going to take. So that's in the paper, so they know exactly where things are going to be. You have to then from Kennedy, you have to then start to look at Lee Harvey Oswald, because he has been the one.
24 years old, by the way.
Huh?
Lee Harvey Oswald, was 24 years old. He was young.
Very young, yeah. But let's look at Lee Harvey Oswald really quickly. He was not that old when he was accused of, he was born in 1939. He was a former Marine. He was a Marxist. He had been dishonorably discharged from the Marines.
Similar to the guy that just shot up the church in Texas.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so many similarities when you look at some of these things.
Yeah, he defected to the
karmic profile.
Well, he was not quite dishonorably discharged from the Marines at first, but it was a kind of a secondary dishonorable discharge. It wasn't until he defected to the Soviet Union in 1959 that they changed it from the type of discharge it was to a dishonorable discharge.
Well, he had to be older than 24th assassination if he was in 1959. I don't know where I got that from. How old was he in 1960?
If he was born in, 39 to 59 would be
20.
20, okay.
And when 63? 24 years old, is that right? Well, yeah, he was 24 years old. I don't know where I snatched that out of my head somewhere, but I thought, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
But anyhow, so he defected to the Soviet Union because he really liked communism and he liked Marxist dictum, and then came back in the 1960s, or actually returned in 62 to Dallas with a wife and a baby girl. When he was picked up for shooting Kennedy, he claimed that he's a patsy. They're just, he's disposable. So that day, he also shot a police officer by the name of J.D. Tippit. We don't know why. He was arrested for shooting J.D. Tippit. Then they decided to go ahead and figure that he had also shot Kennedy. Most of the information that comes out is back and forth from the Warren Commission, because the Warren Commission would do interviews and decide that it wasn't pertinent to the assassination. So, Oswald was a descendant, of all things, of Robert E. Lee. So, had that. He was...
So if we're looking at karmic profile,
yeah.
What does that mean to you that it goes through? Like, why is that an interesting point to you that goes through his DNA? If you're a Southerner,
if you're a Southerner,
that was a good thing. But since you're a Northerner, why are you saying that, Duff?
I'm kind of both. But no, the fact that he was a distant cousin, and you have Robert E. Lee, who basically lost the South, and has that aspect of loser in the family, whether you are from the South or not. Okay, so you have him,
or someone in his family background that had some
political
charge in some form or fashion.
Now, his father died 2 months before he was born, so he didn't really have his father. His mother was a little kind of strange. She decided to move from where he was born, and I don't really have that down, to Dallas.
So he had an absentee father since his father was dead, and he had a domineering mother. So he had a similar profile as Kennedy.
Yes, He attended many, many different schools. He was considered temperamental, withdrawn as a kid. He had a lot of issues with anger. In fact, during one of his visits to New York to visit his mom, he was kicked out of his brother's house because he allegedly hit his mother and threatened his sister-in-law with a knife. So his brother just kicked him out and said that was it. He then went to 7th grade in the Bronx. He was kicked out of school. He was often truant.
But do you think he killed Kennedy?
No.
Okay. So that's what we want to really talk about, is what is the energy around the assassination? And if you want to weigh in on that, please give us a call. Do we have that number going across our screen tonight, Bill?
No.
It's 602-875-0444. So please give us a call if you would like to weigh in on this situation and talk to us about what your theories are about Kennedy as we look at the karmic profile, as we look at the energy around these people.
Look at the karmic profile of Oswald. Go back. He was troubled. He actually tried to assassinate a general, I think it was 2 weeks before Kennedy was assassinated. So did he have it in him? Yeah, he was troubled. He had gone to juvenile detentions. He had psychiatric assessments. He was described as a schizoid, passive-aggressive personality. Not to mention, he had vivid fantasies of being omnipotent and powerful. Mm-hmm. So he was a small guy in stature, and he had these visions that he was powerful and he was omnipotent. He had a hard time holding down a job. So you look at all these aspects of him. Very unhappy person, very dissatisfied.
Very easy then for someone to get to do something for them then.
Oh yeah.
If they talked him into saying that he would be that guy, he could be a pretty easy patsy. If he says he was a patsy, all of that in his karmic background looks like he could be a patsy.
And again, he defected to the Soviet Union, but then he returned in 1962. So the CIA had him under surveillance this whole time, even when he went down to Mexico because he wanted to go back to Cuba and then say what he did. He called a Fair Play for Cuba. Was an organization in New York at the time, and so he called up and wanted to be able to open up a part of that in New Orleans, and would write pamphlets to spread out about how we've got to be able to let Cuba back in the United States.
Well, there goes Cuba and the CIA both coming back together
again.
in the energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then, do you believe that he was a patsy?
When
we get to the actual aspect of the energy around the assassination, we see that in his karmic profile, he's got the capability and the mental issues that would contribute to that.
Yeah. So so capabilities, yes. Patsy, because of the fact that he was under surveillance, and because of the Russians weren't sure if they wanted to have him back because he defected there, then he wanted to come home, then he wants to go back. So what he is saying and what he's trying to tell Cuba at the time is kind of strange, and he was threatening. Even in 1963, when he got the book job at the book depository, where his I guess one of his brothers, he had a lot of half brothers, worked. The FBI would come over and just check on things and would go to this house or where he was living. And he also had a lot of assumed names. Oswald used a lot of assumed names. And he went to the FBI and left a message for a particular guy that said, if you don't leave my wife alone, I will honor my threat to blow up the FBI and the Dallas police.
Okay, so he's crazy.
Yeah, so again, the route to the motor company was in the papers. Anything can be done. From reports from the co-workers about the time of the shooting and where he was, the depository is so convoluted and confused.
Getting to the grassy knoll and getting to the multiple shots and the magic bullet. The energy around that honestly doesn't add up.
No. Well, it doesn't add, because one of the things is that Oswald almost failed his ability for a marksman in the military. So he was not exactly a good shot. So he had to take it several times and barely passed his marksmanship.
Now, there was a woman standing right at the motorcade when Kennedy got shot that had taken a movie, and that's never been seen again.
Yeah.
And then there was another
Because,
woman.
yeah, a man came up to her and said, "Can I?" Yeah, and he took
And then
the
there
whole
was
thing.
another woman that actually took a photograph that they have tried to enhance and enlarge with specialists on photography that seemingly looks like there's a figure in the grassy knoll. So the energy around it seems to be that maybe he was telling the truth, that he was a patsy. And just because he had these ties to both Cuba and the
Russia.
CIA and communism might even indicate more that he's a patsy.
Right.
So
I just
we
dropped the
we
earring.
look at the energy of that, and then we have what happened later with Ruby. Then what happens later with Ruby?
Well, what happens later with Ruby? Ruby is a really, really strange duck, because he wasn't political. In fact, he didn't even vote for Kennedy, which I thought was interesting. But used the fact of shooting Oswald, saying that he wanted to claim back the respect for the Dallas police. So.
In interviews, he is actually talking about that he can't really reveal why he did it. He can't talk about it. And he mentions Adelaide in his interviews afterwards, that if he had been in office as a vice president, it would have never happened. So does that then increase those who have the theory that it was Lyndon B. Johnson in some form or fashion? Does that give them more fodder for their conspiracy theory? As you said, there's so many different theories.
But yeah, if you look at LBJ was from Texas, a womanizer also. Ruby was involved in strip clubs and a lot of illegal stuff. So he was a nightclub owner. He had a number of nightclubs, strip joints. He had close ties with the Dallas police. He procured booze and women for different people around Dallas. Now, I've never been able to look anything up that says he had any direct dealings with LBJ, but since LBJ was, from Texas, I can't imagine he wouldn't know them. So, it's very, very interesting. He doesn't say a whole lot. He ends up dying of lung cancer, but, and again, if you look at the lung, what would...
Lungs means grief. But, it's interesting because he didn't talk. The truth is they interviewed him many times and he didn't talk. And then they arrested somebody named Clay.
Yes.
And, what was it that they thought that Clay did? Clay was from New Orleans, wasn't he?
Yep. Well, and so was, and basically Oswald had been from New Orleans too. So the connection between the two. So you look at the CIA, the FBI, the Cuban Soviet look. You look at the mafia. For all of these different aspects of who was. There's a wonderful, I guess, what is this called? I'll have to get you the name of it now. A documentary that puts together almost evidence like of the CIA involvement in the Kennedy assassination. And a friend of mine that is a trial lawyer said, he says, I've been on many, many courts and talking about murder and so forth. He says, I was so stunned by what they presented that, he said, blew me away. That the CIA was known for having assassins to begin with, so that was part of it. The take on this particular documentary said that there was two people, probably one in the grassy knoll, one someplace else. You look at the Zapruder film and you look at how he was shot. There's really no type of autopsy that did any type of trajectory to CIS. But if you look at the Zapruder film, it didn't look like he was shot from the back, and most of this area back here was shot out. Now, if they're using the type of rifle, it would normally, depending, if it went in the front, it'd be a smaller hole here and the back would blow out. which is what you kind of saw in how he went back, forward, back. So if you're looking at different aspects to try to get it out, it's really hard to see.
But I meditate on it, because that's my job while you're doing this, is to get
Mm-hmm.
some stuff through meditation, and not to look this stuff up. That's your job.
Yeah, I
Mine is
know.
to meditate and
Mhm.
to use my memory. I use my memory on a couple of things I have to say, but when I meditate on it, I see two people in a grassy knoll. One doing the shooting, the other handing the gun to somebody else who unpacks it. I don't know anything
Yeah.
about guns, and puts it away and leaves. Now, how could that happen if everybody's looking towards where the shots happened? Well, it felt to me, as I was looking at it, like a time of shock,
Yeah.
like a time of shock that there wasn't a grass, like almost a, when you see things on the movies in slow motion. Before, when I was looking at in my meditation, before people looked that way, which felt to me like it would have given people plenty of time.
Yeah.
So I feel when I'm looking at all the energy around it, and looked up a few things that I got in my meditation as far as I got the name James, that somebody by the name of James Vail killed him. And James Vail was in prison for a long time, and had at one time admitted to doing it, and then at another time had said no, he didn't, and he was too scared to talk about it. In fact, Oliver Stone went to interview this guy, and he refused to talk to Oliver Stone. So what I did was, when I was meditating, I saw it and I got the name James. I just thought, okay, who could James be? And I quickly did a little Google on James ? And it came up with this James Vail. The other thing that I got, interestingly, that in my meditation, and I don't know if you, because you did this, and obviously this guy didn't pop up for you when you were doing all this research,
yeah.
but the other thing that popped up for me was Hunt from the Watergate.
Exactly. Okay.
That name came to me, and a James came to me in my meditation.
Okay. Hunt from Watergate. This is because this was part of the CIA documentary thing. Hunt had been a CIA operative and assassin.
And obviously, somebody that got caught with Nixon doing something, so he wasn't a stellar character, right?
No, and what he did is said, okay, you're going to let me go and give me money and protect me and so forth, or I will let people know what's going to be going on. So he ended up getting like $6 million in protection for Watergate. Yeah, but Hunt was also, because he was basically a CIA assassin.
Okay, so then one more name came to me, and I didn't do anything with this, but Harrelson.
Okay, Averill Harrelson.
Oh, what's the first name?
Averill.
Averill.
Averill Harrison was responsible for starting the CIA.
Oh, well, that was a good meditation.
Yes, yeah. So Averill Harrison was really the one that started the CIA before World War II, and was not a big supporter of JFK. As I said, George H.W. Senior Bush was at that time the head of the CIA. So neither one of them really liked Kennedy that much, because Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, really thought it's kind of interesting. CIA's getting to have way too much power with nobody to report to, and was considering closing down the CIA.
I see. That's interesting. Okay, so those are the things that came to me in meditation. The only thing I Googled was the James guy, and all I did was see that it said something about him being in prison, and that something about Oliver Stone interviewing him.
Yeah, but I
so
think
if you guys out there are looking at that, you'll have to look that up and write to me and tell me, what
But I
that
think
gets in the
it's
meditation.
Averill Harriman, wasn't it? Harriman.
Harriman?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what can I say? I
thought
was
it was really
meditating.
close,
I
yeah.
got it. I got it.
They
very
didn't
well.
spell the name right. No, but no, that's great, because that really was a big part. Now, I don't, like I said, you asked me if I thought that that Oswald killed him. I have never thought that Oswald killed him. When I
Do you
was,
think anybody does?
Huh?
Do you think anybody thinks that Oswald killed him?
I imagine some people. I think it's probably half and half right now. But when going back to being a child and you have these gut feelings, right?
Mhm.
I was in English class when I heard the news.
Mm-hmm.
My first reaction was that LBJ arranged it.
Hmm.
After.
And is that still your belief?
It was actually Jackie Kennedy's belief too. She thought that he had arranged it. She had said many times that she thought that LBJ was behind the death. So, I don't know. I think he probably may have known about it. Did he arrange it? I don't know. Do I believe that the CIA had an awful lot to do with it? You bet.
Did you read anything about the new papers that have come out? I haven't looked at that or had a chance to do anything like that.
Over 100,000 pages of things, and from what I've been able to glean from it, it doesn't. Too many things have been held back. We talk about the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission, the biggest problem is that, again, information that they got, they decided wasn't pertinent. Even things about what Oswald was doing or not doing, or what people that they had interviewed about what was going on, they would decide whether it actually had something to do with the assassination and then say throw it out or not throw it out. So you're having people decide, well, that doesn't really pertain to this. Well, you don't necessarily know until you start putting pieces together. I have a husband. You know him well. Okay, so doing talk shows over the years, he had Governor Connolly on his show, and this is after the Warren Commission, and Connolly was on a show, I guess, to promote a book or something, and they started talking about what was going on. They started talking about the JFK assassination, and Connolly told Pat at the time, I think he asked him if he thought that Oswald was the only shooter about the grassy knoll. Connolly said, no, I don't think it was just one shooter. I think there was more. He says, I remember seeing a flash come from the grassy knoll. Okay, and they talked, Pat was absolutely astounded. About 2 years later, he comes back to Phoenix. Pat has him on a show again, started to talk about it. And he says, I remember what you told me about there not just being one shooter, or Oswald not the only shooter. And he denies it. I didn't say that. You must be, not remembering what I said. He goes, no, I'm very clear about what that you said. And so he went from giving his story to all of a sudden 2 years later saying, no, just the one shooter was Oswald.
Why is there never a whistleblower when these kinds of things happen? Why does everybody stay hush hush? Is it Big Brother? Are we all so much being puppeteered by our government? Is that what you believe?
I think in any government that wants to try to have a control over people, there's going to be a lot of hush hush, because the more the populace knows, the more education they have, the more they can spout out about it, or the more upset that they can get. In order to have a government, you have to have some sort of a control over the people. So that's why they get involved in having more laws to take care of us morally, physically, emotionally, whatever it happens to be. So they want to control us. They can't control us if we have a lot of information.
What's interesting, because I remember a time that I was being interviewed by Mr. McMahon on his television show live. It was when Bush Jr. was in office. He was asking me something. I was making a prediction that there was going to be an assassination attempt, which, P.S., happened in Georgia, Russia afterwards. But his television station manager and program manager ran out in the commercial and said to me, you can't say that. You can't say that on TV. And Pat said, yes, she can.
Yeah.
It's freedom of speech. She can say whatever she wants. And his program manager said to me, you fix that right now. And then it was like 5, 4, 3, 2, and we're back. And I had to smile and say, well, you know, Pat, sometimes we never know about those kinds of things. And we kind of sort of fixed it. But it's interesting, in those days, the media, at least at the show that I was on with Pat, was concerned about freedom of speech then.
I'm not sure if it's much freedom of speech or scaring people. The biggest problem one of my favorite scenes in a movie, believe it or not, is Men in Black. And when he's sitting down talking to the new recruit. Okay, so about coming in to be one of these people, and they said, well, why don't you tell people about the aliens? You know, they can understand it because he said that they should be fine. He said, one person is fine. Many people are not. They're afraid, they mob, they run, they become agitated, and all kinds of hell breaks loose. So that's the big difference. So what happens is that, one person could know what's going on. If a lot of people end up finding out anything, whether the government is lying to us, there's this, there's the corrupt, then it becomes problematic, because then you have the chance to have mobs.
That's an interesting theory. I really don't know the answer to that, but I wonder what Jackie Kennedy's karmic profile is.
Oh, I didn't do her.
Because, you know, she was the one that went on and actually created the concept of Camelot, and that was very, very shortly after her husband's death. And if you think about it, she was a very young woman. These people were only in their 40s.
Yep.
And I know Izzy thinks 40 is old, but, for us on this side of the table, that's pretty young. So, it's...
But she was raised, she was very well-rounded in her education. She also came from a very prominent family, very well-educated, very well-spoken. And she knew how to use diplomacy very well. So she was able to take different things and put it into her own slant, because she was literally a woman of her time, and she knew how to take care and make things look the best for her husband, for everything else, because that's what women did. So she was very, very well trained in everything that she had done. When she and Jack had been having, a lot of marital problems. Whenever he went over to Germany, then went to France. Well, she charmed the French like you couldn't believe. They thought that she was the greatest thing since, French bread. It changed his opinion of her.
Well, he shared a mistress with one of the mafia guys in Chicago, didn't he?
Yeah.
And so that there was still some energy of mafia around him too. That's another one of the conspiracy theories is the mafia involved? Is the CIA involved? Is the CIA and mafia involved? Is it LBJ? What is it?
The mafia had gotten very involved. Oh, Joseph was involved with the mafia because he was a bootlegger. Okay, he got the mafia to put in a lot of money for support of Kennedy. So when John comes in and brings in Robert is doing all kinds of things to bring down the mafia. And the mafia had gone to Joe and said, you got to control your kids. And once the young boys had kind of gotten out of things, whatever Rose said went, but not what Joseph said. They wanted to go their own way, so they went ahead and went their own way and said, you just tell your guys they need to just, calm it down. Can't be having that.
So is it your theory, Duff, that it's the CIA and George Bush, or is it your theory that it's LBJ and the boys in the band at the White House? What's your theory, kid?
Oh, my theory really is that it's probably the CIA. Because they're really the only ones that could pull it off. Did LBJ know about it? I kind of have to say he may have known about it, but he was not the one, he was not the puppet master of it.
Well, if I'm meditating on something and I get a couple of names that are in reference to the CIA that I don't know, then I think it's got to be the CIA. Otherwise, I wouldn't get it in my meditation.
Right.
So I don't know. I always have said from the time I was a kid that one of the things I'm going to ask God when I get to heaven is who the hell killed LBJ?
I'm not being kidding. JFK.
Or well, sure, that was a Freudian slip,
Yes,
wasn't it? JFK, because that's something from our generation that we've thought about all these years, for sure.
And we, like most good Americans, we want to have an answer.
Want to have an answer.
Yeah, doesn't matter whether it's real or not. So we will come up with every answer we possibly can, and depending on our take on things, if it meshes with our opinions, that's going to be it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, listen, everybody. Really, what we wanted you to understand, to look at tonight, was the energy around that, the karmic profile. So Duff did a really good job showing the karmic profile of John Kennedy and his family background, and how the energy of the generations went, and how his nature and nurture went. And Oswald actually was a mirror of Kennedy in a negative way, if you look at it that way, because remember, there's huge duality on this planet. We're all about the light and the dark. And, maybe Kennedy and all presidents are patsies in certain ways, and so was Oswald. So we are winding down here. I want to tell you that got a new book coming out, and if you will watch me on Facebook in the morning, Melinda Vail Incorporated, I'm doing some live parts to this book, and it's called The ABCs of Spirituality for Everyday Living.
Wonderful.
And that is, of course, after I'm introducing, the Diary of a Mad Medium, which is coming out next week, which has gotten rave reviews. I got a lovely foreword by James Van Prague, and a lovely a paragraph from your husband. And so I'm excited about that. We're going to go cruising.
Yes.
And when we get home from our cruise, we'll have that book up and running. We're going to do another book, Duff, and we've got 8 families that are participating. And this is a serious book because it's about understanding the karmic profile of suicide. And not just suicide, but suicide of a child. So I have 8 families that are willing to share their stories and to work with us, each one of them having a chapter on their journey, their loss, the signs and signals, what it has meant to them since, how working with mediums, because some of them have worked with more than me, have made some differences, the relationship that they can still have with their kids after they've gone to the other side. And so that's exciting. And honest to gosh, we've got one more. And it's called Dogma and Karma, and that is a book written by my little Molly, who is my therapy dog in the office, and she's going to talk about how she hears about karmic profiling through hypnotherapy. So we got all that stuff coming up. And what have you got coming up before we go?
I'm still just doing my hypnosis and hypnotherapy and sex stuff, which is great fun. I
like doing sex stuff too, but not with you.
No. I love it because I always...
Sorry, Izzy's here tonight.
So we always say, because I don't use the term sexology because people don't understand it. So basically, I am a doctor of human sexuality, which has everything to do with sexual anything. So whether it's relationships, marriage, erectile dysfunction, you name it.
Which is sex is the glue. Sexuality and spirituality is the same energy. Okay, so that's why all the priests are going to get a big surprise when they get to heaven.
And speak of that, because I have got the outline now. I'm getting ready to start my book called Sex is Not a 4-Letter Word.
Wonderful. All right, guys. Come on down to the Omni Resort next week, and if you haven't gotten your tickets, please get them. Billy has made arrangements. We have been so full that he's made arrangements to add some chairs. So we still got people looking for tickets. Get on the website and get some. Have a good night.
Good night.